Montana Territory, spring of 1879, the day they buried her baby, the townsfolk whispered behind their hands, and by sundown they had a name for her curse. Virginia O'Connell did not cry. She stood in the cold dirt beside the tiny grave behind the church in Bitter Creek, her dark skirts heavy with mud, her hands still raw from clawing at the earth herself when the gravedigger showed up late. Her little boy, Illy barely 4 months old, had stopped breathing in the night, lips blue, skin cold, no fever, no warning, just gone. And now, so was her place in the town. They whispered that her husband died the year before from a fall that should not have killed a man his size. They said her baby was born too small, too quiet. They said the crops failed on the land she rented. They said her eyes were too still, too knowing. She had once been the schoolteacher's daughter, then the rancher's wife, then the grieving widow. Now they just called her the curse. She lived in a cabin 2 miles outside of town, alone. No one came near, not even the pastor who had once offered her comfort when her husband was found crushed beneath his horse. But she stayed. She planted beans and corn by hand. She chopped her own wood. And at night, she lit the lantern and sat in the rocking chair with her empty arms and empty house. Then, one afternoon in May, a man rode up her road. His horse was lathered and limping, his hat pulled low over a sun-burned face. Dust clung to his boots and coat. He was tall, lean, and looked like he had not eaten in a day or two. Virginia stood on her porch with the axe still in her hand. "You are about 2 miles too far," she said. The cowboy dismounted, favoring his left leg. "Ma'am, I do not mean trouble, just need water." "For the horse, mostly." She studied him. He did not look at her the way the townsfolk did. He looked tired, honest. "There's a trough behind the barn," she said, lowering the axe. "Pump is stiff." He led the horse behind the barn without another word. She watched him from the porch. He was quiet, respectful. He rubbed his horse's nose and whispered to it, took off his coat and used it to wipe the animal's neck. A few minutes later, he came back around, holding his hat in his hands. "Name's Declan Ridge." She did not answer. He looked toward the cabin. "You got a well here," she nodded. "Would pay you for a drink and a place to sit a minute. I will be gone before dusk." She hesitated. No one ever asked to stay. "I do not take boarders," she said, not asking for a bed, just a chair and some water. She nodded once and opened the door. Inside, the cabin was clean but spare. One rocking chair, one table, one bed. A cradle tucked in the corner, covered with a faded quilt. He saw it and his eyes flicked away fast, respectful. She handed him a tin cup of water. He drank and sat at the table. "You live out here alone?" he asked. "I do," he nodded. "That your land? Rented?" He looked around. "You do all this yourself?" "I do not need help." He nodded again, slow. "All right." But he did not leave, not right away. She made cornbread from scratch and sliced a small piece for him. He ate it like it was the finest thing he had ever tasted. "You from here?" he asked. "No." "Where you from? Does it matter?" "Maybe not. I just like hearing people talk. Been on my own too long." She said nothing. He looked at her with something quiet in his face, not pity, not suspicion, just seeing. "I lost a child," she said suddenly, voice flat. "He died in that cradle." Declan sat back in his chair. "I am sorry. They say I cursed him, that I cursed this land. That nothing good grows around me." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "People say a lot of things when they are scared or mean or stupid." She blinked. "You are still here," he said. "That takes more grit than most men I have met." Silence stretched between them. Then she said, "Why are you really here?" "I was heading north. Got jumped by 2 men near the pass. Took my coin and my map. Horse got lame in the chase. I saw smoke from your chimney. You could have gone to Bitter Creek. The sheriff there knows me too well." "Not always a good thing." She looked at him harder now. "You running from something?" "No, just not looking to repeat old mistakes." Outside, the evening light dipped low across the hills. His horse shifted restlessly near the barn. "You can sleep in the barn," she said. "You leave at first light." He nodded. "Thank you." She handed him a blanket and pointed toward the ladder to the loft. He paused at the door. "You are not cursed, Virginia," she flinched. She had never told him her name. He touched the brim of his hat and left. That night, she sat in her rocker beside the cold fireplace, the cradle at her feet. She did not cry, but she did not sleep. The next morning, the sun rose behind the hills, and she found him sitting on the porch steps, smoking a dry twig and watching the light. Horse still limping, he said. Mind if I stay one more day? She looked at him long and hard. Then she said, if you chop wood, you can stay. He smiled, just a little. Deal. That was how it began. Declan chopped wood, mended her fence, fixed the barn door. She cooked simple meals. They spoke little, but the silence felt easier now. On the 5th day, she found him kneeling beside the cradle, not touching it, just staring. I had a daughter once, he said. 18 months, fever took her, wife left not long after. Virginia stepped into the room, her voice was quiet. You did not deserve that. No, he said, but I survived it. He stood and looked at her. We do not have to stay broken, he said. We could try again. Her breath caught. I know I have not earned that, he added, but I would like to. If you would let me. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. Try again, she asked. He nodded. With me? Yes, she stepped forward, her fingers brushed his. I would like that, she whispered, and for the first time in a long time she smiled. By late June, the snow had long melted off the high ridges, and the cottonwoods by the creek ran full with green. The days came slower now, stretching long beneath the sun, and Declan was still there. He had not asked again what they were to each other. He did not press. He worked beside her quiet, steady, and unassuming. He built a chicken pen with salvaged wire, reinforced the root cellar against the coming autumn, and once rode into the hills to bring back bitter herbs for her aching joints after she spent too long bent over rows of beans. Virginia had begun to count his footsteps in the morning. She knew the sound of his boots on the porch, the way he cleared his throat before coming through the door, how he always left space between them when he passed, though never too much. That morning, as she poured water into the basin behind the house, she saw him crouched at the edge of the pasture, examining something in the grass. She walked toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. What is it? He stood slowly, brushing his palms against his trousers. Tracks, small hooves. Could be mule deer. She tilted her head, following his gaze. They won't come close, not with you stomping around. Declan glanced at her, mouth twitching. I thought you said I wasn't much trouble. I said you could stay. That's different. He chuckled under his breath and nodded toward the fence. A section near the south corner's leaning. I'll fix it before supper. You always fix things before I notice they're broken. He looked at her then and held her gaze longer than usual. That's the point, isn't it? Virginia felt something shift in her chest, like the first warm wind that comes before a storm. She turned toward the house without answering. By evening, the fence stood straight again, and he brought in a handful of wild onions he'd found near the creek. She chopped them into the stew without speaking, but when he passed behind her to set the table, his hand brushed lightly against her back. That night, they ate in the hush of oil lamp light, and after they put away the dishes, she reached for her shawl and stepped outside. He followed. The stars were beginning to show, faint and scattered above the pine line. They stood beside each other without touching, the silence between them softer than it had ever been. I used to think quiet meant something was missing, she said, watching the sky. Now I think maybe it just means nothing's wrong. Declan folded his arms across his chest. I've been in places loud enough to drown a man's thoughts. Never did me any good. Virginia glanced sideways at him. You ever think about going back to wherever you came from? He shifted his weight, then shook his head. There's nothing left behind me worth reaching for. She looked down, then reached for a nearby stone and turned it over with her foot. I've never been west of the crazy mountains. Never had a reason. You do now, she stilled. Declan looked straight ahead, voice even. I'm not asking you for promises, not yet, but if you let me stay, I'll build you something better than what you've had to carry alone. She turned toward him, arms folded against the night chill. I don't know if I still believe in better. He let that sit a while, then stepped closer, not touching, but near enough she could feel the warmth off his coat. Then let me believe for both of us, just till you do. Virginia's throat tightened. She nodded once, a small motion, but he saw it. They stood like that until the wind picked up. She turned back toward the door, and this time he followed her inside without a word. He didn't go to the barn that night. She didn't ask him to. By mid-July, the grass lay tall and silver in the wind, and the hills had gone dry at the edges. A windmill clattered somewhere in the distance, but their land held quiet. Declan had begun marking the days by the grain in her voice, the way she hummed while carrying the wash or didn't. That morning, Virginia stood barefoot on the back stoop, sleeves rolled to the elbow, apron damp from rinsing linens. Her hair was pinned up carelessly, tendrils falling loose down her neck. He'd watched her sometimes when she didn't know, not out of hunger but reverence. There was a steadiness in her, like earth after it had been broken and made to grow again. She didn't turn when she heard his step behind her. "I found a saw blade down by the old fence line," he said. "It's rusted through, but the teeth are still sharp." She wrung out the last sheet and leaned it against the railing. "Might use it to trim the apple tree. Branches hang too low near the back gate. I'll take care of that today." She nodded once and moved to the line, hanging the wet fabric with practiced hands. He hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking about putting in a second stall in the barn. There's enough space if I shift the tack wall." She clipped the last clothespin and looked over her shoulder. "Planning on another horse?" "No," he said. "Planning on staying." Her hands paused at her sides. The breeze played with the hem of her skirt. "Wasn't sure you'd want to," she said finally. "I wouldn't stay if I wasn't sure." She stepped down onto the grass, bare feet sinking into the warm soil. "You think you can build a life out of what's left here?" He met her eyes. "I think we both can if we're careful with what we've got." They stood that way until the wind shifted. She turned toward the path that led to the creek, and he walked beside her without asking. They stopped where the cottonwoods clustered thickest, where the water curved slow and shallow around a bed of stones. She knelt and dipped her hands in, letting the current pass through her fingers. "I used to come here when I was carrying him," she said. "He'd kick when I sat still too long. I thought he'd be restless like his father." Declan crouched beside her, arms resting on his knees. "Didn't know you had a place like this," he said. "No one else does." She looked down at the water, quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to try again," she said. "Not just children, any of it." He didn't answer right away. Then, "If you never can, I won't love you less." Her breath caught, but she didn't move. "I don't want to go back to what I lost," she said. "I want something new. But I'm still afraid. I wake up sometimes," he said, "and forget where I am. Think I'll find her beside me. Then I remember it's been years, and I'm still here." She turned to him slowly, eyes unreadable. "You still grieve her?" "Yes, but I don't live in it anymore." Her gaze softened. "That's what I want. Not to forget, just to stop drowning." He reached out, not to take her hand, but to rest his palm flat on the grass between them. She placed hers beside it. They sat like that while the water moved past and the sun climbed higher. Later, back at the cabin, she brought out a small wooden box from the shelf above the hearth. Inside were scraps of fabric, a button, a faded ribbon. "I haven't opened this since the funeral," she said. He didn't touch it. "I want to pack it away. Not to hide it, just to give it rest." He watched her fold the ribbon gently, place the button on top, then close the lid. "Will you help me build a shelf?" she asked. "Somewhere high where it won't get knocked." "I will." They worked side by side through the afternoon, measuring, sawing, sanding smooth the edge of a pine board. When they mounted it above the mantel, she slid the box into place and stepped back, arms folded. It wasn't an ending. But it was something close to peace. That night, she didn't light the lamp. They sat outside until the stars came full, her shoulder resting lightly against his. "I've never shared this place with anyone," she said. "You have now." She tilted her face toward him, and he leaned in slow, giving her time. Their lips met like a promise spoken soft, no fire, no rush, just the steady warmth of two people choosing each other after all the rest had fallen away. She pulled back just enough to see his face in the dark. "We'll build it slow," she said. "But we'll build it." He nodded, forehead against hers, and they stayed there under the stars, not broken anymore. Just beginning, by the first week of August, the rains had stopped coming altogether. The ground cracked in white lines underfoot, and the shallow creek wore itself thinner each day. Virginia kept a pail by the door and rationed the well water with a careful eye. Declan had begun leading the horse down to the deeper bend every morning, returning with his shirt damp from the effort. One evening, as the sky blushed faint pink, she stood by the edge of her bean rows, head tilted toward the windless air. Declan came beside her, wiping his hands with a cloth stained from sharpening tools. "You ever think about putting in a cistern?" he asked. "There's no one left to haul the stones." I could take the wagon out toward Red Bluff. There's a quarry near there, might take me 2 days. She didn't answer right away. Then, that road's not safe past the ridge. You'd need a rifle and the axle's loose. He nodded. I'd still go if it means not losing the last of the crop. She turned to face him. You always speak like you've got a stake in this place. I do, he said. She didn't look away. I'm not easy to build around. I've never looked for easy. He reached into his coat pocket, drawing out a small strip of leather. Folded inside was a square of blue cloth patched with fading thread. This was the hem from my daughter's first dress, he said. I've carried it for years. She studied it, voice low. Why give it to me? Because I want my past to rest somewhere steady, and I think it would be safe with you. She took the cloth slowly, her fingers brushing his. Her throat worked once before she slipped it into her apron pocket. I've never carried anyone else's story before, she said. Then it's time someone trusted you with something worth holding. Later that night, she sat at the table mending a tear in the curtain. Declan stood at the hearth, fitting a new iron hook for the kettle. The lamplight threw soft shadows across the cabin walls. Without looking up, she said, There's an old ledger in the chest beneath the bed. My father kept it when he taught school. I started writing in it after Illy was born. He waited. There are pages I can't read anymore, she said. But it's part of me. If something ever happened to me, I'd want someone to know I tried. He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that. No, he said, but I can promise I'll stay. She set the needle down. Her hand, still calloused from years of work, reached up to touch his jaw. Then let's stop waiting for something to go wrong, she said. Let's start planting for what might grow. A long silence passed between them. Not the heavy kind they'd once weathered, but the kind that settled in when two people had no need to fill the space between them. That night, she lit the lamp in the loft for the first time. He climbed the ladder after her, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. They did not rush. They did not speak. In the morning, she brought him coffee in the blue enamel cup that had once belonged to her husband. She set it on the table without comment, but he understood what it meant. That afternoon, she drew a map by hand, rough lines tracing the corners of her land, the slope of the hill, the run of the creek. She showed him where the soil stayed soft longest, where the wind always came first before a storm, where the deer bedded down in winter. He studied it until the sun dipped low, then folded it and tucked it into his breast pocket. We'll need to start preparing for frost by late September, she said, her voice steady. I'll be here. He didn't say it like a vow, he said it like a fact. She reached for his hand, then not tentative, not uncertain, and he laced his fingers through hers. And for the first time, she didn't brace herself for the leaving. She simply held on. The first frost came early that year, thin and pale across the fields like breath on glass. Virginia woke before the sun and stepped out onto the porch with her shawl drawn tight, watching the white cling to the last of the bean vines. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Declan was already outside, stacking the last of the kindling beneath the lean-to. His breath steamed in the morning air. He straightened when he saw her, brushing his palms together. We'll lose the squash if we don't pull them by midday. She nodded once, then turned back inside to fetch her gloves. By noon, the wagon bed was full earth-coated roots, rough-skinned pumpkins, onions bundled in twine. They worked without hurry, careful not to bruise what little had made it through the dry months. When they'd finished, she leaned against the gate and looked out over the fields, yellowing now, the furrows showing through. I thought it'd feel emptier by now, she said. It doesn't. It feels like something waiting, not something ending. Declan wiped sweat from his temple with the back of his wrist. We built it that way. She looked over at him, lips parted like she might say something more, but then a flicker of movement caught her eye. A rider came slow down the road from Bitter Creek, horse dark, rider hunched low in the saddle. She stepped forward, hand resting on the fence rail. That's Pastor Wells. Declan tensed beside her, then relaxed as the man drew closer. The old preacher dismounted stiffly, tipping his hat. Miss O'Connell, Mr. Ridge, Virginia stepped out to meet him. We haven't seen you in months. Wells nodded, his face lined deeper than she remembered. I heard word from the mercantile that you'd taken on help. Thought I'd see for myself. Declan said nothing. He didn't shift, didn't smile. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, still but for the wind lifting the edge of his coat. "I don't need anyone to vouch for me," Virginia said quietly. Wells looked between them, then gave a tired sigh. "I came to ask if you'd consider teaching again. The schoolhouse is near empty, but the children left are needing steadier hands." She blinked. "You want me back. I want someone who doesn't scare when the roof leaks or the stove smokes. You've lived through worse than a broken chair." She folded her arms. "You didn't defend me when the others talked." "No," he admitted, "but I see now I should have." The silence grew again, broken only by the creak of tack as the preacher's horse shifted. Declan stepped forward. "She'll think on it." Wells nodded, then turned to mount again. Before he left, he looked down at Virginia, his voice low. "There's no curse on a woman who keeps going. That's faith, not failure." After he rode off, she stood quiet for a long time. "I never thought I'd be asked back," she said. "You don't owe them forgiveness," Declan said. "But if it gives you purpose, I'll ride with you each morning till the road's clear before daybreak." She looked up at him, the corners of her eyes soft. "You do that. I'd ride further if it meant walking back with you." That night, she took out the ledger from the shelf and opened it for the first time since packing it away. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She turned the pages slowly, then pulled out a blank sheet and dipped her pen. She began a new list: winter stores, repairs needed before snow, books to request for the children. At the bottom, she wrote his name. Later, beneath the warmth of the quilts, she whispered into the dark, "I want to marry you before the ground freezes." His hand tightened around hers. "Then we'll speak the vows ourselves. No crowd, no fuss. We'll need a ring. I've got a silver coin I kept from my father. I could melt it down, shape it myself." She turned to face him. "That's good. I'll make it plain. But strong. That's better than fine." The next afternoon, they walked out to the creek bend, where the cottonwoods held their last yellow leaves. Virginia wore her mother's shawl. Declan had shaved clean for the first time in weeks. They spoke their promises with their hands joined, no more than a breath between them. "I vow to walk beside you," she said, "not ahead or behind." "I vow to build with you," he answered, "not just shelter, but a life." They kissed once, and the wind stirred the leaves around their feet. That winter, she taught 12 children at the schoolhouse, 3 of them half-blood, 2 born to ranch hands, the rest scattered from nearby farms. Declan repaired the stove, rewrote the primer pages with cleaner ink, and built a rail to keep the porch from sagging. At home, they shared coffee each morning. The blue enamel cup passed between them. Her laughter returned in pieces like thaw. He carved a cradle from pine and placed it under the window, not as a promise, but as a space kept open. By spring, the fields greened early. She planted lavender by the door. He hung the horse's tack with care and shaped a bench from the last of the barnwood. One evening, as dusk settled soft across their land, she rested her head on his shoulder and said, "I never thought I'd carry peace." He kissed the top of her head. "You've earned every breath of it." And they stayed that way, his arm around her, her hand resting warm against his chest while the sun dipped behind the hills, and the stars came out above a home they had built together.